Maria Santos stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed just 98 pounds soaking wet. When she walked into the military recruitment office in downtown Phoenix, on that sweltering August morning in 2018, the sergeant behind the desk looked up from his paperwork and couldn't hide his smirk. "You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" Sergeant Johnson asked, his eyes scanning her petite frame. The dance studio is 3 blocks down. Maria had heard comments like this her entire life. Growing up in a rough neighborhood where her single mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, she learned early that people judged her based on her size. But what they didn't see was the fire burning in her dark brown eyes, or the determination that had carried her through high school as valedictorian despite having to work nights at a local diner. "I want to enlist," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the sergeant's condescending tone. "Infantry." Sergeant Johnson actually laughed out loud. "Infantry? Kid, you look like a strong wind would blow you over. Have you considered the medical corps? Maybe communications?" "Oh." Maria placed her hands on the desk and leaned forward slightly. "I want infantry. I want to be a soldier, not a medic or a radio operator." The sergeant shook his head but began pulling out the necessary paperwork. He'd seen plenty of young people with unrealistic dreams about military service. Basic training would cure this tiny girl of her delusions soon enough. 3 months later, Maria found herself at Fort Benning, Georgia, standing in formation with 60 other recruits on the first day of basic training. The drill sergeants walked up and down the lines, sizing up their new charges with practiced eyes that could spot weakness from 100 yards away. Drill Sergeant Martinez stopped directly in front of Maria. At 6 feet 4 inches and built like a linebacker, he towered over her so completely that his shadow blocked out the morning sun. "What do we have here?" he bellowed, his voice carrying across the entire formation. "Did someone order a child instead of a soldier?" The other recruits snickered. Maria kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut. "I said, what do we have here? To recruit? Recruit Santos, drill sergeant." "Santos? You related to anyone in the military, Santos?" "No, drill sergeant." "Well, Santos, I hope you brought your appetite, because you're going to be eating a lot of dirt over the next 16 weeks. The first weeks of basic training were brutal for everyone, but they seemed especially designed to break Maria. During the initial physical fitness test, she struggled with the push-ups and could barely complete the minimum required pull-ups. When it came to the 2-mile run, however, something different happened. While bigger recruits huffed and puffed their way around the track, Maria seemed to float over the ground. Her small frame required less oxygen, and years of running to school, to work, and everywhere else because her family couldn't afford a car had given her legs like steel springs. She finished the run in 14th place out of 60 recruits, beating soldiers who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. Drill Sergeant Martinez checked his stopwatch twice, certain there had been a mistake, but it was during weapons training that Maria truly began to distinguish herself. The first time she picked up an M16 rifle, something clicked. The weapon felt natural in her hands, like an extension of her own body. When they moved to the firing range for marksmanship training, the other recruits struggled to hit targets at 200 yards. Maria's first shot hit dead center. The range instructor, Staff Sergeant Williams, walked over to check her target through his binoculars. He lowered them slowly and looked at the tiny recruit with new interest. "Santos, do that again." Her second shot hit within an inch of the first. Again. The third shot created a cloverleaf pattern so tight that all 3 holes overlapped. Word spread quickly through the training company. The little girl who looked like she belonged in high school instead of the army could shoot like nobody they'd ever seen. During the advanced marksmanship phase, while other recruits struggled to qualify, Maria consistently scored expert ratings, but her size continued to work against her in other areas. During combat training exercises, she had trouble with the heavier weapon systems. The M249 squad automatic weapon was almost as big as she was, and carrying it during long marches left her exhausted. Her fellow recruits began to whisper that she might be a good shot, but she'd never make it as a real soldier. The breaking point came during week 8, during a particularly grueling field exercise. The recruits had been marching for 12 hours, carrying full packs and equipment. Maria struggled under the weight of her gear, falling further and further behind the main group. Finally, she stumbled and fell face first into the mud. Recruit Davidson, a former college football player from Texas who stood 6'3" and weighed 220 pounds, looked down at her with disgust. "This is exactly why women shouldn't be in infantry," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Especially tiny ones who belong in a dollhouse, not a foxhole." Several other recruits laughed. Maria pushed herself up from the mud, wiped her face, and shouldered her pack again without saying a word. But inside, something hardened. She'd spent her entire life proving people wrong about what she could accomplish, and she wasn't about to stop now. That night, while the other recruits slept, Maria snuck out to the training area and practiced with her rifle. She ran the obstacle course in the dark, timing herself and working to improve her speed. She did extra push-ups and sit-ups until her muscles screamed in protest. The next morning, during the final phase of weapons training, the drill sergeants introduced a new element: long-range precision shooting. They'd set up targets at distances ranging from 400 to 600 yards, distances where even small variations in wind, temperature, and humidity could throw off a shot by several inches. "Most of you won't be able to hit anything past 300 yards, Drill Sergeant Martinez announced. "But we're going to see who has the potential for advanced training." One by one, the recruits took their turns. Davidson managed to hit a target at 400 yards on his third try and swaggered back to the group with a cocky grin. Other recruits had mixed results, with most failing to hit anything beyond 400 yards at all. When Maria's turn came, the range fell silent. She approached the firing line carrying her M16 with the same calm confidence she'd shown from the beginning. She took her position, adjusted for wind and elevation, and controlled her breathing exactly as she'd been taught. Her first shot at 400 yards hit center mass. Her first shot at 500 yards hit the bullseye. At 600 yards, a distance where most soldiers would struggle to even see their target clearly, Maria took her time. She felt the wind against her cheek, calculated the bullet drop in her head, and squeezed the trigger with the patience of someone who understood that perfection required complete focus. The target spotter called out, "Bullseye." Even Drill Sergeant Martinez was impressed. After the exercise, he pulled Maria aside. "Santos, have you ever heard of sniper school?" She shook her head. "It's the most demanding training the Army offers. Most candidates wash out in the first week. It requires not just marksmanship skills, but also incredible mental discipline, patience, and physical endurance. The training lasts 6 months, and fewer than 30% of candidates graduate." He paused and studied her face. "But I think you might have what it takes. Are you interested?" Maria thought about all the comments about her size, all the assumptions people had made about her capabilities, all the time she'd been underestimated simply because she didn't look like their idea of a soldier. "Yes, Drill Sergeant, I'm very interested." The paperwork for sniper school took weeks to process. During that time, Maria continued to excel in basic training, ultimately graduating third in her class overall and first in marksmanship. But even as she prepared to move on to advanced individual training, the comments about her size persisted. "I heard Santos is trying for sniper school," she overheard Davidson telling a group of other recruits. "Can you imagine? She probably can't even carry the rifle they use. I heard those things weigh like 20 pounds. Snipers need to be invisible," another recruit added. "Hard to hide when you're dragging a rifle that's bigger than you are." Maria said nothing, but she made a mental note. When she got to sniper school, she was going to show them what this tiny girl could really do. The letter came on a Tuesday morning in November. Maria had been accepted to the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning. Classes would begin in January, giving her just enough time to complete her advanced individual training and prepare for what many considered the most challenging course the military offered. Her drill sergeant congratulated her, but even he seemed to have doubts. "Santos, I'm not going to lie to you. Sniper school is brutal. The instructors don't care about your feelings, your background, or your potential. They only care about one thing. Can you do the job when lives depend on it? A lot of soldiers who look much more capable than you have washed out of that program. Maria nodded respectfully, but inside she was thinking about something her mother had told her years ago when kids at school made fun of her size. Mija, her mother had said in Spanish, people will always judge you by what they see on the outside. But what matters is what you carry inside your heart. Show them who you really are. Not with words, but with actions. As she prepared for the next phase of her journey, Maria knew that sniper school would be her chance to show the world who she really was. She had no idea that within 2 years, she'd be carrying a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle in the mountains of Afghanistan, earning a reputation that would make her one of the most feared and respected snipers in modern military history. But first, she had to survive the training that would transform her from a small-town girl with a good eye into one of the deadliest soldiers the Army had ever produced. The journey was just beginning, and the hardest challenges lay ahead. The U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning was housed in a series of unremarkable brick buildings that looked more like a community college than the home of the military's most elite marksman training program. Maria arrived on a cold January morning with 12 other candidates, carrying a single duffel bag and the same determination that had gotten her this far. Chief Warrant Officer Thompson, the head instructor, was a legend in sniper circles. He'd served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, with over 200 confirmed kills to his credit. When he looked at Maria standing among the other candidates, his expression was unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen combat. "Welcome to Sniper School. Before we begin, let me be crystal clear about something. This isn't basic training. This isn't advanced individual training. This is where we separate those who think they can shoot from those who can actually kill." He paced in front of the group, his eyes scanning each candidate. "Over the next 24 weeks, we will push you beyond your physical and mental limits. We will teach you to shoot accurately at distances most soldiers can't even see. We will teach you to remain motionless for hours in conditions that would break most people. And we will teach you to take a human life with a single shot from over a mile away." His gaze stopped on Maria. "Some of you are probably wondering why we have candidates who look like they belong in different military occupational specialties. Let me tell you something. I don't care if you're 6 feet tall or 5 feet tall. I don't care if you weigh 90 pounds or 200 pounds. I only care about one thing. Can you put steel on target when it matters?" The first week was designed to weed out candidates who weren't serious about the commitment. The physical training was brutal, with daily runs that lasted for miles, obstacle courses that seemed designed by sadists, and strength training that pushed everyone to their limits. Maria struggled more than most during the physical portions, but she noticed something interesting. While she couldn't carry as much weight as the bigger candidates, she could carry it for longer distances. Her small size, which everyone assumed was a weakness, actually gave her better endurance and required less food and water to maintain her energy levels. But it was during the first marksmanship evaluation that the other candidates really began to take notice. The test was simple in concept but brutal in execution. From a distance of 300 yards, candidates had to hit a target the size of a dinner plate. They had one shot, and the target was partially obscured by brush and shadow. Wind was gusting at 15 miles per hour from the northwest. Candidate Johnson, a former Marine who'd qualified expert with multiple weapon systems, went first. His shot hit the target, but several inches off-center. Candidate Martinez, a Special Forces veteran, did better, hitting within 2 inches of the bullseye. When Maria's turn came, the other candidates watched with the kind of attention usually reserved for watching a car accident. She took her position behind the rifle, a standard M24 sniper weapon system that looked comically oversized in her small hands. She spent nearly 2 minutes just observing. She watched the grass to judge wind direction and speed. She noted how the shadows fell across the target. She calculated distance, elevation, and humidity in her head, with the kind of methodical precision that impressed even the instructors. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the bullet hit dead center. "Lucky shot," she heard someone mutter behind her. The next phase of training focused on stalking and concealment. Students had to move across 1,000 yards of open terrain, set up a shooting position, and take a shot without being detected by instructors equipped with high-powered spotting scopes and binoculars. This was where Maria's size became a significant advantage. While larger candidates struggled to remain hidden, she could disappear into terrain features that wouldn't conceal a child. Her small frame allowed her to move through spaces that were impossible for bigger students. During one exercise, she spent 4 hours moving just 200 yards, army crawling through grass that was barely tall enough to hide a rabbit. When she finally reached her shooting position and took her shot, the instructors had never even seen her. "Where the hell did she come from?" Chief Thompson asked his assistant instructor, scanning the field with binoculars. "No idea, Chief. It's like she just materialized." But the real test came during the 4th week, when students were introduced to the Barrett M82A1 50 caliber sniper rifle. Known simply as the 50, it was a weapon that had achieved legendary status among snipers. Weighing over 30 pounds loaded, with a barrel that was nearly 3 feet long, it could accurately engage targets at distances exceeding 1.5 miles. When the armorer brought out the Barrett rifles, several candidates whistled in appreciation. These weren't just weapons. They were precision instruments capable of stopping vehicles, penetrating body armor, and engaging targets at distances that seemed almost science fiction. Candidate Peterson, who stood 6'4" and had played linebacker in college, picked up his Barrett with obvious comfort. "Now this is what I'm talking about," he said, shouldering the massive rifle like it was a hunting rifle. When Maria approached her assigned Barrett, the contrast was almost comical. The rifle was nearly as tall as she was, and weighed roughly 1/3 of her body weight. Several candidates snickered as she struggled to lift it to her shoulder. "Jesus," Peterson said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She looks like a little kid trying to shoot her daddy's hunting rifle." Chief Thompson overheard the comment and walked over to Peterson. "Something you'd like to share with the class, candidate?" "No, Chief. Just observing that some people might be better suited for different weapon systems." "I see. Well, Peterson, since you're so confident with that Barrett, why don't you take the first shot? Target is at 800 yards. The target at 800 yards was barely visible to the naked eye, a small steel plate that would ring when hit." Peterson took his position, spent a few minutes calculating his shot, and squeezed the trigger. The massive rifle bucked against his shoulder with tremendous recoil. The target remained silent. "Miss?" called the spotter. Peterson looked surprised but took his second shot. Again, no impact on target. After his third miss, Chief Thompson called him off the line. "Next candidate." One by one, the other students attempted the 800-yard shot. Most missed entirely. 2 managed to hit the target, but only after multiple attempts. When Maria's turn came, the weight of the Barrett forced her to use a bipod and shooting bags for support. She couldn't hold the massive rifle steady any other way. As she struggled to get into position, she could hear whispered comments from the other candidates. "This is embarrassing. She can barely lift it. What are the instructors thinking?" Maria ignored the commentary and focused on the fundamentals she'd been taught. At 800 yards, a mistake of just 1 degree would send the bullet several feet off target. She studied the wind flags downrange, noted the mirage patterns that indicated air temperature variations, and calculated her hold based on the ballistic characteristics of the 50 caliber round. The Barrett's trigger required significantly more pressure than the smaller rifles she'd trained on. She had to use the pad of her index finger, rather than the joint, to get enough leverage. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the rifle's recoil nearly knocked her backwards off her shooting position. The sound of the bullet striking steel rang clearly across the range. "Hit," called the spotter. Chief Thompson walked over to Maria as she struggled to extract herself from behind the massive rifle. "Santos, that was your first shot with a 50, correct?" "Yes, Chief." "Interesting. Peterson, you've been talking a lot about weapon suitability. Care to explain how someone who can barely lift the rifle just outshot you?" Peterson's face reddened, but he said nothing. As training progressed through the winter months, the divide between Maria and many of her fellow candidates became more pronounced. She consistently outperformed larger, stronger students in marksmanship, but struggled with some of the physical requirements that came easily to them. The tension came to a head during week 8. During an exercise that combined everything they'd learned so far. Candidates had to hike 5 miles, carrying full equipment, establish a concealed position, and engage multiple targets at varying distances with the Barrett rifle. The hike nearly broke Maria. The Barrett, even broken down into its component parts for transport, was brutally heavy. Her pack, rifle components, ammunition, and other equipment weighed more than she did. By the third mile, she was falling behind the main group. Candidate Stevens, a former Army Ranger, looked back at her struggling with obvious disdain. "This is exactly why physical standards exist," he said to Peterson. "What happens when she has to carry that rifle in combat and can't keep up? Someone dies. That's what happens. She's going to get someone killed." Peterson agreed. The instructors need to face reality. Maria heard every word, but she kept putting one foot in front of the other. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Show them who you really are. Not with words, but with actions." When they finally reached the shooting position, Maria was exhausted and sweating despite the cold weather. Her hands shook as she assembled her rifle and prepared for the shooting portion of the exercise. The first target was at 600 yards, the second at 800, the third at 1,000 yards, a distance that challenged even experienced snipers. Stevens went first, hitting 2 of 3 targets. Peterson managed 1 hit out of 3. Other candidates had mixed results. When Maria took her position behind the Barrett, she forced herself to control her breathing and ignore her fatigue. She'd made this shot before in training, but never after a grueling hike while carrying equipment that weighed more than she did. Her first shot at 600 yards was a clean hit. Her second shot at 800 yards rang the steel target with authority. The 1,000-yard shot was the real test. At that distance, the target looked like a grain of rice. A slight miscalculation in wind speed or direction would send the bullet wide by several feet. Maria studied the conditions downrange for nearly 3 minutes. She noted every wind flag, every piece of vegetation that might indicate air movement, every detail that could affect her bullet's flight path. When she squeezed the trigger, the Barrett's massive report echoed across the range. For a moment, there was silence. Then the distinctive ring of steel on steel carried back across the 1,000 yards. "Hit," the spotter called. Chief Thompson lowered his binoculars and looked at the tiny soldier who'd just accomplished something that most of her larger, stronger classmates couldn't do. 3 for 3, he announced to the group. "Outstanding shooting, Santos." That evening, as the candidates cleaned their equipment and prepared for the next day's training, the conversation was different. The snickering had stopped. The comments about her size had become whispers. Stevens approached her as she worked on disassembling her Barrett. "Look, Santos," he said awkwardly. "I may have been wrong about some things. That was some serious shooting today." Peterson nodded agreement from across the room but didn't come over to apologize directly. Maria looked up from her rifle cleaning kit. "The Barrett doesn't care how big I am," she said quietly. "It only cares about steady hands and good math." As winter turned to spring, the training intensified. Students learned advanced ballistics, wind reading, range estimation, and target identification. They studied anatomy so they'd know exactly where to place shots for maximum effectiveness. They learned about different types of ammunition and how each performed under various conditions. But most importantly, they learned patience. Snipers often waited hours or even days for the perfect shot. They had to remain motionless in uncomfortable positions while enduring heat, cold, insects, and the constant stress of knowing that discovery meant death. During one exercise, Maria lay motionless in a muddy creek bed for 8 hours, waiting for a target to appear. When it finally did, she had a 3-second window to take her shot before the target disappeared again. Her bullet found its mark. By the time graduation approached, only 7 of the original 13 candidates remained. Maria was not only among the survivors. She was the top graduate in her class. Her marksmanship scores were the highest in the program's recent history, and her fieldcraft skills had impressed even veteran instructors. Chief Thompson pulled her aside the day before graduation. "Santos, you've got a choice to make. You can request assignment to a conventional unit, where you'll probably spend your time training other soldiers, or you can volunteer for deployment with a special operations unit that's heading to Afghanistan in 3 months. What would I be doing in Afghanistan? Hunting Taliban commanders in some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. The unit specifically requested a sniper with your skill set. But I need to be honest with you. It's going to be even more challenging than anything you've experienced here. Maria thought about the journey that had brought her this far. From the recruiting office where a sergeant had suggested she join the medical corps, to basic training where soldiers had questioned whether she belonged in infantry, to sniper school where classmates had doubted she could handle the equipment. I'll take the deployment, Chief. Thompson smiled. I thought you might. Pack your gear, Santos. You're about to find out what it really means to be a sniper. As she walked out of the building that had been her home for the past 6 months, Maria reflected on how much had changed. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who'd struggled with basic training. She was now Private First Class Maria Santos, United States Army sniper. And she was about to take her skills to one of the most dangerous places on Earth. What she didn't know was that in the mountains of Afghanistan, carrying a Barrett .50 caliber rifle that weighed almost as much as she did, she would soon earn a reputation that would make her one of the most feared and respected soldiers in her unit's history. Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan was a collection of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and guard towers perched on a plateau, surrounded by some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. When Maria arrived in June 2019, the temperature was already pushing 100 degrees, and the dust seemed to coat everything within minutes of being cleaned. Captain Rodriguez, the commanding officer of Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, looked up from his maps when Maria reported for duty. The Special Operations Unit had specifically requested a sniper with exceptional marksmanship skills for their upcoming mission into the Hindu Kush Mountains, but he clearly hadn't expected someone who looked like she'd just graduated from high school. "You're Santos?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "Yes, sir. PFC Santos, reporting for duty." Captain Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. "I was told we were getting a sniper who graduated at the top of her class from sniper school. I was expecting someone different." This conversation was becoming familiar. "Sir, I understand that my appearance doesn't match expectations, but I assure you that I'm qualified for whatever mission you have planned." The captain gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, Santos. Let me explain what we're dealing with out here." He pointed to a map of the surrounding mountains that was covered with red marks, indicating known enemy positions. "We're hunting a Taliban commander named Khalil Ahmad. This guy is responsible for coordinating attacks that have killed over 50 coalition soldiers in the past 6 months. He's smart, he's careful, and he knows these mountains better than anyone. Our intelligence suggests he's planning something big. Possibly an attack on this base." Over seasons, Maria studied the map, noting the elevation markers and terrain features. "What's the mission profile, sir?" "Problematic. Ahmad moves through these mountains using routes that are almost impossible to reach with conventional forces. The terrain is so rough that helicopters can't land, and foot patrols would be spotted hours before they got close. We need someone who can get into position at extreme range and take him out when the opportunity presents itself." He looked at her directly. "The shot distances we're talking about could exceed 1,500 yards. The elevation is over 10,000 feet, which affects ballistics. Weather conditions are unpredictable, and if you're discovered, extraction might not be possible." Maria nodded. "I understand, sir." "Do you?" "Because what I'm describing isn't a training exercise. If you miss, Ahmad disappears and more soldiers die. If you're compromised, you might not make it home. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility?" For a moment, Maria thought about her mother, working 3 jobs to support her family. She thought about the recruiting sergeant who'd suggested the medical corps. She thought about all the people who'd assumed she couldn't handle the challenges that came with being a soldier. "Sir, I didn't come this far to fail now." Captain Rodriguez studied her face for several seconds, then nodded. "All right, Santos. Your spotter will be Sergeant First Class Walker. He's done 4 tours over here and knows these mountains as well as anyone. You'll have 48 hours to prepare before we insert you into position." Sergeant First Class Michael Walker was everything Maria wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, and intimidating in the way that only veteran special operations soldiers could be. When they met at the armory to discuss equipment, his skepticism was obvious. "Captain says you're some kind of shooting prodigy," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes doubtful. "I do my job, Sergeant. Your job is about to get real complicated. We're going into terrain that will test every skill you learned in training. The shot we're planning has only been attempted a handful of times in combat, and never successfully at the range we're talking about." He gestured toward the Barrett rifle that would be her primary weapon. "That 50 weighs 32 pounds loaded. Add in ammunition, optics, spotting scope, communications gear, food, and water for potentially 3 days, and you're looking at carrying 80 pounds of equipment up a mountain that would challenge experienced climbers." Maria looked at the pile of gear that she'd be expected to carry. It weighed nearly as much as she did. "Sergeant, I've been carrying heavy loads since I was 12 years old. The weight doesn't scare me. It's not just about weight, Santos. It's about everything else. Altitude affects how far bullets travel. Wind in these mountains can shift direction and speed without warning. Temperature swings of 40 degrees between day and night will change your bullet's trajectory, and that's assuming we can even get into position without being spotted." He pulled out a photograph taken from a reconnaissance drone. "This is where we think Ahmed will be tomorrow night. It's a village called Kuala Ina, nestled in a valley at 9,500 feet elevation. The only shooting position that gives us line of sight is on this ridge, here." Maria studied the photo. The ridge was a knife edge of rock nearly 2,000 yards from the target area. "Have you calculated the ballistics for that shot?" "I've run the numbers a dozen times. With the Barrett M82A1, using M33 ball ammunition, you're looking at a flight time of nearly 3 seconds. At that elevation and range, you'll need to aim roughly 6 feet high and 4 feet right to compensate for bullet drop and wind drift." "What's the target size?" "Best case scenario, you'll have a human torso at 1,500 yards. That's roughly an 18-inch target. At that range, any error in calculation or execution will result in a complete miss." That night, Maria spent hours studying weather reports, topographic maps, and ballistics tables. She calculated and recalculated bullet trajectories under different conditions. She studied photographs of the target area until she could identify every building, every tree, every potential hiding spot. But mostly, she tried to prepare herself mentally for what she was about to do. Sniper school had taught her to shoot at targets and silhouettes. Tomorrow, she would be taking aim at another human being. At 0300 hours, a Black Hawk helicopter inserted Maria and Sergeant Walker at a landing zone 8 miles from their intended shooting position. The flight in had been nerve-wracking, with the pilot flying low through mountain valleys to avoid detection by enemy radar. The hike to their position was everything Sergeant Walker had warned her about, and worse. The terrain was a nightmare of loose rock, steep slopes, and elevation changes that left both soldiers gasping for breath in the thin air. Maria's pack felt like it was filled with lead, and the Barrett rifle case seemed to catch on every rock and tree branch they passed. After 6 hours of climbing, they finally reached the ridge that would serve as their shooting position. The view was spectacular and terrifying at the same time. The valley spread out below them like a map, with the target village clearly visible in the distance. Sergeant Walker immediately began setting up the spotting scope, while Maria prepared her shooting position. She arranged shooting bags and bipods to create the most stable platform possible, then carefully assembled the Barrett rifle. "Range to target is 1,520 yards, Walker reported, studying the village through his spotting scope. "Wind is currently 8 to 10 miles per hour from the southwest, but it's been shifting throughout the day." Maria made adjustments to her scope and began studying the target area through her rifle's optics. At over 1,500 yards, individual people were barely visible, even with high-powered magnification. They waited. Snipers spend most of their time waiting, remaining motionless for hours while monitoring their target area for any sign of enemy activity. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature soared past 100 degrees. Maria's uniform was soaked with sweat, but she didn't dare move from her shooting position. At 1,430 hours, Sergeant Walker spotted movement in the village. I've got multiple individuals moving between buildings. Can't get positive identification yet. Maria peered through her scope, scanning the village systematically. Through the heat shimmer rising from the valley floor, she could make out several figures, moving around what appeared to be the main building. I need better visibility on faces, she whispered. Patience, Santos. Our target is careful. He won't expose himself unless he feels safe. They continued waiting as the afternoon heat became almost unbearable. Maria's shooting position was on exposed rock with no shade, and the metal surfaces of her rifle were too hot to touch without gloves. At 1,647 hours, their patience was rewarded. I've got him, Walker said quietly. Target is exiting the main building, moving toward the courtyard. Range 1,520 yards. Maria shifted her rifle slightly and acquired the target through her scope. Even at maximum magnification, the figure was small and indistinct. She could make out basic human features, but identifying specific details was impossible. Confirm target identification, she whispered. Walker studied the figure through his spotting scope, comparing what he saw to intelligence photographs they'd studied before the mission. Positive identification. That's our guy. Height, build, and movement pattern match intelligence reports. Maria felt her heart rate increase as she prepared for the shot that she'd trained her entire military career to make. She checked her scope settings, confirmed her range estimation, and calculated holds for wind and elevation. Wind is currently 9 miles per hour from 270 degrees, Walker reported. Temperature is 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity is 12%. Maria made minute adjustments to her point of aim, holding slightly high and right to compensate for the environmental factors. At 1,500 yards, the slightest error would send her bullet several feet off target. Target is stationary, Walker whispered. You have a shot. Maria controlled her breathing, letting half the air out of her lungs and holding it. She placed her finger on the trigger and began to apply pressure with the same mechanical precision she'd learned in training. The Barrett's massive report echoed across the valley like thunder. Through her scope, Maria watched the .50 caliber bullet's vapor trail streak toward the target area. For nearly 3 seconds, time seemed suspended as the bullet flew across the 1,500 yards of empty air. Then she saw the target drop. Hit, Walker confirmed. Target is down and not moving. Within minutes, other figures in the village were running toward the fallen target. Through his spotting scope, Walker watched as they gathered around the body. Confirmed kill, he said. Nice shooting, Santos. Maria safed her rifle and began breaking down her shooting position. As the adrenaline faded, she realized what she'd just accomplished. She'd made a successful engagement at a range that would challenge even veteran snipers, under conditions that were far from ideal. But more importantly, she'd eliminated a target who'd been responsible for killing American soldiers. The shot she'd just made would save lives. How do you feel? Walker asked as they prepared to move to their extraction point. Maria thought about the question. Like I did my job. The extraction went smoothly, and by 2,200 hours they were back at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for them in the Tactical Operations Center. Drone footage confirms target elimination, he reported. Intelligence intercepts suggest that Ahmad's network is in chaos without their leader. This was a significant victory. Rend. 1. He looked at Maria with new respect. Outstanding work, Santos. That was one hell of a shot. Word of Maria's successful mission spread quickly through the base. The tiny sniper who looked like she belonged in college had just made one of the longest-range kills in the unit's history. Soldiers who'd initially questioned her capabilities began to view her with the respect reserved for combat-proven warriors. But Maria knew this was just the beginning. There would be other missions, other targets, and other opportunities to prove that she belonged among the Army's elite soldiers. She'd shown that size didn't determine capability, but she understood that every mission would bring new challenges and new chances to fail. What she didn't know was that her reputation was about to spread far beyond Forward Operating Base Chapman, and that her next mission would test every skill she'd developed in ways she'd never imagined. 3 weeks after her successful elimination of Khalil Ahmad, Maria found herself in the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman, surrounded by officers whose rank insignia indicated this was no routine mission. Colonel Harrison, the task force commander, had flown in specifically for this briefing, along with intelligence analysts from multiple agencies. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who'd spent decades in special operations. "We have a problem that requires our most capable assets." He gestured toward a large screen displaying satellite imagery of a remote mountain complex. "This is the Spingar mountain range, approximately 40 kilometers from the Pakistani border. Intelligence indicates that a group of high-value targets has established a training camp at this location. We're talking about bomb makers, weapons smugglers, and terrorist coordinators who've been responsible for attacks throughout the region." Captain Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, what makes this target set different from our previous operations?" "Two things, Captain. First, the terrain is more challenging than anything we've encountered. The target complex is situated at nearly 12,000 feet elevation, accessible only by foot through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers. Second, recent intelligence suggests they're planning to move a significant weapons cache, including surface-to-air missiles, within the next 72 hours. Maria studied the satellite imagery, noting the impossible terrain surrounding the target area. The mountains rose like vertical walls, with narrow ridges and deep valleys that would funnel wind in unpredictable patterns. Colonel Harrison continued, "Conventional assault is not an option. The terrain prevents helicopter insertion anywhere near the target, and a foot patrol would be detected long before reaching the objective. However, there is one possible approach." He pointed to a ridgeline approximately 2 miles from the target complex. "This ridge offers line of sight to the target area, but it's only accessible from the north, requiring a 15-mile approach march through some of the most difficult terrain in Afghanistan. The shot distance would be approximately 3,200 yards. The briefing room fell silent. 3,200 yards was nearly 2 miles, a distance that pushed the Barrett rifle system beyond its designed capabilities. It was the kind of shot that existed more in theory than in practice. "Sir," Sergeant Walker spoke up, "a shot at that range would require perfect conditions and exceptional marksmanship skills. Are we certain it's feasible?" "We're not certain of anything, Sergeant. But intelligence analysts believe we have a narrow window of opportunity. If these weapons reach their intended destination, we could be looking at aircraft being shot down and significant coalition casualties." He looked directly at Maria. "Santos, your performance 3 weeks ago was exceptional. But this mission would require shooting at a distance that's never been successfully attempted in combat conditions. Are you willing to try?" Maria felt every eye in the room focused on her. The weight of expectation was heavier than any pack she'd ever carried. At 3,200 yards, she'd be attempting something that challenged the laws of physics as much as her own skills. "Sir, I'll need to study the ballistics and environmental conditions, but yes, I'm willing to attempt the shot." Colonel Harrison nodded. "You'll have 24 hours to prepare. The insertion is scheduled for tomorrow night." After the briefing, Maria and Sergeant Walker spent hours in the base's ballistics laboratory, working with computers that calculated bullet trajectories under various atmospheric conditions. The numbers were sobering. "At 3,200 yards, flight time is over 4 seconds, Walker reported, studying the ballistics data. "Bullet drop is approximately 38 feet. That means you'll be aiming at empty sky and hoping the bullet falls into the target area." Maria ran the calculations herself, checking and rechecking the mathematics. "Wind drift at that distance could be 20 feet or more, depending on conditions, and we haven't even considered altitude effects or temperature variations. The computers are assuming perfect conditions," Walker continued. "No wind, standard temperature and humidity, sea level pressure adjusted for altitude. In the real world, any of those variables could change dramatically and send your bullet hundreds of yards off target." They studied topographic maps of the target area, noting elevation changes, wind patterns, and potential shooting positions. The ridge they'd be occupying was exposed to weather from 3 directions, with no natural windbreaks or shelter. "Here's what really concerns me," Walker said, pointing to the map. "This approach route takes us through territory that's not completely cleared of enemy forces. If we encounter resistance during the approach march, we won't make it to the shooting position at all." Maria nodded, understanding the full scope of the challenge they faced. This wasn't just about making an impossible shot. It was about surviving a dangerous infiltration through hostile territory to even attempt the mission. That evening, she called her mother from the base's communications center. She couldn't discuss the specifics of her upcoming mission, but she needed to hear a familiar voice before heading into the most dangerous situation of her military career. "Mija, you sound worried," her mother said in Spanish. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine, Mama. Just missing home. You know, when you first told me you wanted to join the army, I was terrified. You're so small, and the world is so dangerous. But now, I understand something I didn't before." "What's that?" "Size has nothing to do with strength. You've always been the strongest person in our family, even when you were just a little girl working in the restaurant to help pay our bills. Whatever you're facing over there, I know you can handle it." After the call, Maria spent the night checking and rechecking her equipment. The Barrett rifle was functioning perfectly, but at 3,200 yards, even a microscopic flaw in the barrel or scope could result in a miss. She cleaned every component multiple times and verified the zero on her optics using the base's precision range. The insertion began at 2,100 hours with a helicopter flight to a landing zone 15 miles from their objective. The pilot flew nap of the Earth through mountain valleys, using terrain to mask their approach from enemy radar. Even with night vision goggles, the flight was terrifying, with the helicopter's rotors seemingly inches from cliff faces as they threaded through narrow canyons. The landing zone was a small clearing barely large enough for the helicopter to touch down. Maria and Walker jumped out with their equipment and immediately took cover as the aircraft departed, leaving them alone in one of the most remote and dangerous regions of Afghanistan. The approach march was a nightmare that lasted 14 hours. They moved through terrain that would have challenged experienced mountain climbers, carrying packs that weighed nearly as much as Maria herself. The altitude made every step a struggle, and the rocky terrain seemed designed to turn ankles and cause falls. Several times they had to take cover when they heard voices or movement in the distance, possibly enemy patrols or local civilians who might report their presence. Each delay added hours to their approach time and increased the risk of missing their narrow window of opportunity. By dawn, they'd covered only 8 miles, less than half the distance they needed to travel. Walker checked their position using GPS and consulted his map. "We're behind schedule," he reported quietly. "If we don't pick up the pace, we won't reach the shooting position before the target window closes." They pushed harder through the morning, ignoring fatigue and the effects of altitude. Maria's legs burned with each step, and the Barrett rifle case seemed to gain weight with every mile. But she kept moving, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. At 1,400 hours, they finally reached the ridge that would serve as their shooting position. The view was breathtaking and terrifying. The target complex was clearly visible in the distance, but it looked impossibly small and remote. Through binoculars, individual buildings appeared to be the size of matchboxes. "Range to target is 3,180 yards, Walker reported after taking multiple readings with his laser rangefinder. "Elevation difference is 840 feet, target below our position." Maria began setting up her shooting position while Walker established observation. The ridge was completely exposed, offering no cover from the elements or from enemy observation. If they were spotted, extraction would be impossible. The environmental conditions were challenging. Wind was gusting between 15 and 25 miles per hour from multiple directions as air currents swirled around the mountain peaks. Temperature was dropping as afternoon clouds moved in, and humidity was fluctuating as weather patterns shifted. "This is going to be the most difficult shot ever attempted," Walker said as he studied conditions through his spotting scope. "Wind alone could throw your bullet 30 feet off target." Maria made calculations and adjustments to her scope, but she knew that at 3,200 yards, any mathematical error would result in a complete miss. She was essentially aiming at empty air and trusting physics to bring her bullet down into the target area. At 1,630 hours, Walker spotted movement in the target complex. "I've got multiple individuals moving between buildings." "Wait. I see what appears to be weapons being moved from one building to another. This could be our window." Through her scope, Maria could barely make out human figures moving around the complex. At over 3,000 yards, positive target identification was nearly impossible, but intelligence had indicated that anyone at this location was a legitimate target. Wind is currently 22 miles per hour from the northwest, gusting to 30, Walker reported. Temperature is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity is 43%. Maria made her final adjustments, calculating holds that would account for the extreme range and environmental conditions. She was essentially aiming 15 feet high and 12 feet left of where she wanted the bullet to impact. I have what appears to be a high-value individual moving in the open, Walker whispered. Range, 3180. Target is stationary. Maria controlled her breathing and began applying pressure to the trigger. At this distance, the slightest movement or error would send her bullet hundreds of yards off target. The Barrett's massive report echoed across the mountains like an avalanche. Through her scope, Maria watched the vapor trail of the .50 caliber bullet arc high into the air before beginning its descent toward the target area. For over 4 seconds, time seemed frozen as the bullet flew across nearly 2 miles of empty space. At that distance, the target had time to take several steps before the bullet arrived. Then, through his spotting scope, Walker saw a figure at the target complex suddenly collapse. "Hit!" he whispered with excitement. "I can't believe it." But that was a hit. Within minutes, the target complex erupted in activity as people ran toward the fallen figure. Through their optics, Maria and Walker could see the chaos their single shot had created. Confirmed kill at 3,180 yards, Walker reported into his radio. Target is down. As they prepared to move to their extraction point, Maria realized what she'd just accomplished. She'd made a successful engagement at a distance that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible with current technology. More importantly, she'd eliminated a target who posed a significant threat to coalition forces. The extraction took 18 hours of dangerous movement through enemy territory, but they reached the pickup zone without contact. As the helicopter lifted them away from the mountains, Walker looked at Maria with something approaching awe. "Santos, what you just did, there are maybe 5 people in the world who could have made that shot. You just became a legend." But Maria was already thinking about the next mission, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to prove that determination and skill mattered more than size or appearances. She'd shown the world what she could accomplish. But she knew her journey was far from over. What she didn't know was that word of her impossible shot would soon reach the highest levels of military command, and that her reputation as one of the most capable snipers in the world was about to change everything about her military career. 6 months after her record-breaking shot in the Spingar Mountains, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos found herself standing in the Pentagon, wearing her dress uniform and wondering how she'd gone from being mocked for her size to briefing generals about sniper operations. The promotion had come with her new assignment to the Army's Special Operations Command, where her reputation had opened doors she'd never imagined possible. General Patricia Hayes, one of the highest-ranking women in the Army, sat across from Maria in an office that overlooked the Potomac River. On the wall behind her desk hung photographs of the general with presidents, foreign leaders, and Medal of Honor recipients. "Staff Sergeant Santos," the general began, "your record speaks for itself. 2 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards, including what our ballistics experts are calling the longest successful sniper engagement in modern combat. But that's not why you're here." Maria remained at attention, unsure what to expect from this meeting. "At ease, Sergeant. Please, sit down." General Hayes gestured toward a chair. "What I'm about to discuss with you is classified, but I believe you've earned the right to hear it directly from me." Maria took the offered seat, her mind racing with possibilities. "Your success in Afghanistan has attracted attention at the highest levels of government. The Secretary of Defense wants to implement a new training program for special operations snipers, and they've specifically requested that you lead the development of long-range precision courses." The general paused, studying Maria's reaction. "But there's more. The President himself has been briefed on your accomplishments. You've become a symbol of what's possible when we judge people based on their abilities rather than their appearance. There's talk of using your story for recruiting and public relations purposes." Maria felt a mixture of pride and concern. "Ma'am, I appreciate the recognition, but I'm a soldier, not a spokesperson. General Hayes smiled. That's exactly the attitude that makes you perfect for what I have in mind. We're not asking you to become a poster child, Sergeant. We're asking you to share your knowledge and skills with the next generation of snipers. She pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be training curriculum documents. This program would be based at Fort Bragg, working with special operations candidates from all branches of service. You'd be developing advanced marksmanship techniques, long-range ballistics courses, and fieldcraft training that incorporates lessons learned from your combat experience. Maria reviewed the documents, noting the scope and ambition of the proposed program. Ma'am, this looks like it would train snipers for missions beyond current operational requirements. Some of these range calculations extend to over 4,000 yards. That's correct. We're preparing for conflicts that may require capabilities we don't currently possess. Your experience has shown us that with the right training and equipment, engagements at extreme ranges are not only possible, but potentially decisive. General Hayes leaned forward slightly. There's one more thing, Sergeant. This assignment comes with a promotion to Sergeant First Class and the opportunity to attend the Sergeant Major Academy upon completion of the program development. You'd be on a fast track to senior non-commissioned officer positions. As Maria considered the offer, her mind drifted back to the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the recruiting office where she'd been dismissed as too small for infantry, through basic training where she'd been called weak, to sniper school where classmates had questioned her ability to handle the equipment. Ma'am, I have one question. Why me? There are senior snipers with more experience and higher qualifications. General Hayes's expression became serious. Because you've proven something that we're only beginning to understand. Traditional assumptions about physical requirements for certain military occupational specialties may be limiting our effectiveness. Your success suggests that precision, intelligence, and determination might be more important than size and strength in many specialized roles. She gestured toward Maria's service record on her desk. More importantly, you've demonstrated these capabilities under the most challenging conditions possible. Every instructor in this program will know that their techniques have been proven in combat against determined enemies. Maria thought about the soldiers she could train, the lives that might be saved by better marksmanship, and the opportunity to change how the military viewed capability versus appearance. I accept the assignment, General. 3 months later, Maria was standing in front of 30 special operations candidates at Fort Bragg, preparing to teach her first advanced marksmanship class. The students came from Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Marine Force Reconnaissance, and Air Force Special Operations. Representing the elite of America's military, most of them towered over her by 6 inches or more, and several had been skeptical when they learned their instructor was a small woman who looked young enough to be in college. My name is Sergeant First Class Santos, she began, her voice carrying the authority earned through combat experience. Over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to teach you to make shots that you currently think are impossible. She gestured toward the Barrett M82A1 rifles that were arranged on tables behind her. Who can tell me the maximum effective range of this weapon system? A Navy SEAL raised his hand. 1,800 yards, Sergeant. That's what the manual says. But manuals are written by people who make assumptions about limitations. In combat, I've successfully engaged targets at ranges exceeding 3,000 yards, using this same weapon system. The class stirred with interest and skepticism. I know what you're thinking. You're looking at me and wondering how someone my size can handle a rifle that weighs more than 30 pounds. Some of you are probably wondering if I'm even qualified to be standing here. She picked up one of the Barrett rifles and shouldered it smoothly. Let me save you some time. Yes, this rifle is heavy. Yes, it produces significant recoil. And yes, I'm smaller than any of you. But marksmanship isn't about size. It's about understanding physics, controlling variables, and applying mathematical principles under stressful conditions. She pointed toward the range, where targets were visible at various distances. Today we're going to start with shots at 1,200 yards. By the end of this course, you'll be engaging targets at distances you never thought possible. But first, you need to forget everything you think you know about limitations. The training was intensive and demanding. Maria pushed the students through ballistics calculations that challenged their mathematical skills environmental awareness exercises that required split-second decision-making, and physical training that built the stamina needed for long-range operations. During week 3, the real breakthrough came. The class was attempting shots at 2,500 yards, a distance that tested the Barrett rifle's capabilities and the students' skills. Most were struggling to hit targets consistently at that range. Master Sergeant Williams, a Marine sniper with 4 combat tours, was becoming visibly frustrated with his repeated misses. "I don't understand this," he said after another failed attempt. "I've been shooting for 15 years, and I can't make this work." Maria studied his shooting position and technique. "Master Sergeant, you're fighting the rifle instead of working with it. You're trying to muscle it into position instead of using physics to your advantage." She demonstrated the proper technique, showing how to use shooting bags and bipods to create a stable platform that didn't require physical strength to maintain. At extreme ranges, consistency is more important than power. The rifle will do the work if you let it. Williams followed her guidance and made the adjustment. His next shot hit the target center mass. "I'll be damned," he said, looking at Maria with new respect. "How did you figure that out?" Because I had to. I couldn't rely on size or strength to make shots work, so I had to understand the science behind it." As the weeks progressed, the students' attitudes toward their instructor evolved dramatically. Word spread through the special operations community about the remarkable training they were receiving from someone who'd not only mastered the theoretical aspects of long-range shooting but had proven those skills in the most demanding combat conditions. During the final week of training, General Hayes visited the course to observe a demonstration. The students were attempting shots at 3,500 yards, pushing the Barrett rifle system beyond its design specifications. One by one, the students took their turns, with most achieving hits that would have been considered impossible just 6 weeks earlier. When it came time for Maria to demonstrate, she took her position behind the massive rifle that still looked oversized in her small hands. The shot she was attempting was at 3,800 yards, further than she'd ever shot in combat. Environmental conditions were challenging, with gusty winds and changing temperatures affecting ballistics calculations. She spent several minutes calculating holds and studying conditions through her scope. At nearly 2.5 miles, the target was barely visible even with maximum magnification. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the Barrett's report echoed across the range. For over 5 seconds, everyone watched as the bullet flew across the incredible distance. The impact was confirmed by spotters using high-powered optics. Against all odds, the shot had found its mark. General Hayes approached Maria after the demonstration. "Sergeant First Class Santos, what you've accomplished here goes far beyond marksmanship training. You've challenged fundamental assumptions about human potential and military effectiveness." She gestured toward the students, who were discussing what they'd witnessed with obvious excitement. "These soldiers will return to their units with capabilities they never thought possible. More importantly, they'll carry with them the knowledge that limitations are often just assumptions that haven't been properly challenged." As Maria's assignment at Fort Bragg concluded, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small town in Arizona to becoming one of the Army's premier marksmanship instructors. The same determination that had carried her through basic training, sniper school, and combat deployments had now allowed her to reshape how the military approached long-range precision shooting. But perhaps more importantly, she'd proven that excellence wasn't determined by physical appearance or traditional expectations. She'd shown that with enough dedication, skill, and understanding of fundamental principles, anyone could achieve what others considered impossible. On her final day at Fort Bragg, Master Sergeant Williams approached her as she was packing her equipment. "Sergeant Santos, I owe you an apology. When I first saw you, I thought this course was going to be a waste of time. I couldn't have been more wrong." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What you've taught us isn't just about shooting. It's about not letting other people's assumptions limit what we think we can accomplish." That's a lesson that goes far beyond the military. As Maria prepared for her next assignment, she knew that her story was far from over. She'd proven that size didn't determine capability, that determination could overcome skepticism, and that excellence was available to anyone willing to work for it. The girl who'd been mocked for thinking she could handle a Barrett .50 caliber rifle had not only mastered the weapon, but had become one of the most respected marksmanship instructors in the military. She'd shown the world that the most dangerous assumptions aren't about equipment or tactics, but about the limits we place on human potential. Years later, when young soldiers struggled with doubt about their own capabilities, instructors would tell them about Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the tiny sniper who'd proven that the only real limitations are the ones we accept for ourselves.